Such a wonderful introduction. And I'm going to go over a little bit with what we're going to go over tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about self-care and mindfulness. And I think part of doing that is doing a little check-in on how we're doing. I think the health field is really great about getting us all in for those yearly annual exams, but not so much about, well, how do we check in on our mental and emotional well-being? And then we're going to talk a little bit about what self-care is. We'll get into mindfulness, some of the myths and benefits of it. And then we'll spend some time talking about what kind of hijacks our day and keeps us from being able to be really present with ourselves and in our life. And then I'll have some mindfulness activities to go through at the end of the day. And as we go through this, I have some slides that are going to look kind of like handouts. All of those are going to be available to you. Bailey's going to email those out after the presentation, so you'll have access to them. And I have this quote here that I really like from Megan McCormick, and I think it's a variation of what we've all heard. If we don't take the time to take care of ourselves, if we don't put the oxygen mask on first, we won't be able to take care of the people around us that we care so much about. And I think what it's really wonderful about reminding us is that taking some time out for self-care isn't selfish. Instead of, it's a really good way of starting to get to know ourselves, get to understand what our needs are and how we need to take care of ourselves and give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves. And it really starts to build some realization of our own self-worth and value. And while I love, for a long time, I looked at self-care as, maybe happy hour with girlfriends, laying in the hammock, reading a book, spa day. But what I've learned over the years is it's actually doesn't require us to do only passive activities. Kind of what I call the harder side of self-care requires us to be a little more active in taking care of our mental and emotional well-being. And the first term going to pop up, we could spend an hour just talking about those, learning to set boundaries, self-accountability. Another part of self-care is developing self-compassion, which a lot of people can struggle with. And one of the things that a mindfulness activity or practice can help us develop is start to be able to have more self-compassion for ourselves. And then what we're going to spend the first part of what we're talking about is how do you check in on your own mental well-being? What would that even look like, and what would you be looking for? And then finally, we'll start to get into mindfulness, some of the myths, some of the benefits, and then I'll take us through a few mindfulness activities at the end of the evening. And I think, one of the nice things about starting a self-care routine or a mindfulness routine is it allows us to kind of notice what's going on in our body and with our emotions before red flags start popping up. So instead of something becoming a crisis, we're able to check in with ourselves before it gets to that point and kind of understand what's going on with us so that we can take care of ourselves and be involved in being able to maintain our own mental well-being and health. So as you start to assess your own well-being, I'm going to ask you kind of just a simple question. When you think about all the roles that you have, whether that's, a mother, a daughter, an employee, a partner, friend, how well are you actually able to fulfill those roles? How's it going? And one of the things that, starting here, if you're noticing that you're struggling in certain areas, this might, be a place for you to examine a little further. So the next thing you'll want to take a look at is your mood and what you're looking for. I'm going to go through kind of a series of questions. And what you just want to ask yourself is, are you seeing any changes from what's typical for you? So have you seen your emotions change? Are you typically someone who's pretty calm and relaxed, but suddenly maybe recently you've been feeling more anxious, noticing some worrisome thoughts? Are you someone that typically is pretty happy, but noticing that maybe you're struggling with, maybe some sadness or loneliness? And then have your behaviors changed? One of the things that we know oftentimes as our emotions start to change, our behaviors can change with them. Are the things that have made you happy and brought you joy in the past, are they still doing that? Or are you finding that, things that you've often enjoyed in the past, you're kind of just feeling or lackadaisical about? Have you noticed that you've become more irritable, or are you snapping at maybe roommates or your spouse or coworkers? And then are you catastrophizing more than you usually do? And what I mean by that is when you think about the people in your life and the things going on in your life, do you go to the worst case scenario? Um, and so once we've kind of been able to identify what's going on with us, and this is one of the handouts that's going to be available to you, being able to spend some time and check in with our emotions can be important. And what we'll learn as we go through this, one of the things that is so wonderful about mindfulness and practicing mindfulness activities is that it allows us to be able to really stay with our emotions, especially those emotions that end up on more of the, the negative or intense side. And if you look at the middle, the happy, sad, angry, bad, those are kind of the core emotions. And we're usually really, really good about identifying those emotions. But what happens is it gets a little more difficult to kind of figure out what might be underneath those emotions or driving those emotions. And I'll use the example of sadness. I work with a lot of clients that suffer from depression. And excuse me, this past year, they've noticed that they've been feeling a lot more sad. And they've had difficulty kind of, figuring out what was going on. And they're like, my depression seems to be worse. I'm experiencing more sadness. Well, as we started to look at the emotion wheel, what they were identifying is that they were feeling lonely and isolated because of COVID. So it wasn't necessarily that their depression was getting any worse. It's that they were dealing with the ramifications of a world pandemic. And so what we talk about is when we start to experience those more negative emotions, that can be an indication that there's some sort of need there that's not getting met. And so with these clients, what we were finding is, the need that wasn't getting met was that need for social connection. So we were able to, by being able to figure out what was kind of driving that sadness, work together and figure out ways for them to be more connected to their friends and family. Okay. And so the next thing that I have, and these are going to be available to you as well. It's once we've identified our emotions, it's kind of important to be able to get a handle on how intense they are. And a lot of times, particularly for women, having intense emotions of anger or fear can be really difficult for us because we haven't, society's, maybe taught us that, it's not okay for us to express anger. So a lot of times, a lot of my female clients will end up kind of pushing those feelings aside. And so having a mindfulness practice, again, what it's teaching us is how to sit with ourselves and experience our emotions without getting caught up in them. Because ideally, where we want to be, I have one for anger and one for anxiety. So ideally, where we want to be is somewhere on that 1 to 3. We're feeling pretty calm, in control. Our emotions aren't ruling us. And what we want to be able to do is as we start to tick up a little bit around 4 or 5, that's when we want to be able to really notice that, okay, my emotion has started to change. Maybe the thoughts with that are changing. Because what we find is it's much easier to cope with those emotions and put coping techniques in place while we're still rational. Because once we've hit 8, 9, or 10, we're reacting from a very emotional place, and it becomes much more difficult to calm ourselves down, to rationally talk ourselves through our emotions. 8, 9, and 10 has just put us at we are reacting from an emotional place. And again, what a mindfulness practice can start to help us with is we've been learning how to sit with our emotions, and we've been learning how to sit with those more intense and maybe some emotions that might actually be scary for you. And you've learned to sit with them and the thoughts that come with them without judging yourself for having those thoughts or emotions. And you've been able to better recognize what goes on in your body when you feel these emotions, what kind of thoughts come up for you. So during your day, as maybe you're starting to get a little more anxious, you'll be able to better notice earlier what you're feeling and thinking and what's going on within your body, so that you can notice yourself at a 4 or 5 and maybe put in place some of those coping techniques that you have that help calm you back down before you get to an 8, 9, or 10, and you're reacting and then having to kind of deal with the consequences of those strong emotions. Because what happens when we get to that 8, 9, or 10 is something that's known as the amygdala hijack. And so for the most part, when we're calm and relaxed, we are functioning from the front part of our brain. And the front part of our brain is where we process all the information that's coming in. So everything that we're hearing and smelling and experiencing, the front part of our brain is processing that from a very rational and logical place. This is the part where we're able to reason, we're able to think things through, make decisions about how we're going to handle things. And the front part of our brain is also what allows us to think about and process our emotions. And on the screen, from the kind of the prefrontal cortex, the front of that brain, you'll see a little track that leads to what is the little nut, the amygdala. And what happens is when we have a very stressful or strong emotion, our amygdala will activate. And this is a great thing. If you're driving down the street and you've gotten distracted and you look up in front of you and the car in front of you stopped and you need to slam your brakes on, it's wonderful that the brain can very quickly assess that danger and react. It's not so great when you're having a disagreement with a coworker or you've walked into a messy house and you have that same kind of reaction. And another example of that is any of you that might suffer from anxiety. What happens in the brain is the brain has a hard time telling the difference from a regular case of nerves and something that is an impending disaster. And once the brain senses any kind of threat, whether it's real or imagined, the amygdala kicks in. And once it kicks in, it shuts down the front part of our brain. So that part of our brain that we think and reason with, and that we can, kind of think through how we want to act, plan how we're going to act and make decisions, it's totally inactive, and our fight or flight response is taken over. And this is when we find ourselves kind of responding to situations from a very emotional, irrational place, and where we find, sometimes we overreact to a situation. And then once we've cooled down and we go back and think about it, it's like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have reacted that way or said some of the things that I did. And that's because, unfortunately, the brain does have a really hard time distinguishing between what is a real threat and what is a reaction to stress and strong emotions. All it knows is that something's happened and it has to keep us safe. And so the last bit of checking in on your own well-being is checking in on your body, because what we know is our mental and emotional health And well-being can affect our physical health. And then our physical well-being, our physical health ends up affecting us emotionally and mentally. So some questions to ask yourself. How have you been sleeping? Are you sleeping more or less? Are you sleeping well? Are you able to sleep all through the night? When you wake up, are you feeling refreshed or do you still feel tired? How are you eating? Have you noticed any changes in your eating habits? Are you grinding your teeth? And grinding teeth can be an indication of stress. Are you noticing any tension in your neck and shoulders? Because what tends to happen when we find ourselves feeling stressed or anxious or angry, our shoulders will start to rise up toward our ears and we'll hold all that tension there. Are you having headaches? And some of the things, if you do have headaches from time to time, what you're looking for are you having headaches more frequently? Has the intensity of those headaches changed? And has the location in your head changed where those headaches are? And that can be a sign of additional stress or tension. And then, are you being active the way that you used to be? And so, once again, once you've kind of gone through these questions, again, what you're looking for is a change for you. Are you noticing any changes? And if you are, this can give you kind of an indication maybe where in your life you might want to spend a little more time examining. Okay. All right. So next we're going to kind of move into what mindfulness is. And I have a couple quotes that I really like. Mindfulness shows us what is happening in our bodies, our emotions, our minds, and the world. And then I think for me, my favorite, the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose to the present moment non-judgmentally. And I think what I like about this is this kind of ties back into self-care. Because both self-care and mindfulness can require us to be active in paying attention to what's going on with us. But what mindfulness asks us to do is to leave judgment out of it. So we kind of become a curious observer in our own life and of ourselves. Okay. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about the myths of mindfulness. And I think the big one is mindfulness is meditation. And I think for so long, meditation and mindfulness were used almost interchangeably. Meditation actually is a mindfulness technique. Mindfulness is about taking time out to rest and relax. And so this would indicate that it's a very passive practice. But actually, what it is, it's not about us being, in this kind of unactive state of relaxation. Mindfulness really asks us to take a proactive approach to our mental and emotional well-being. Mindfulness is having no thoughts. And while I think this would be, sometimes I think it would be wonderful to go 5 or 10 minutes without a thought popping into my head. Unfortunately, we just aren't wired like that. We really are very lucky to go 2 or 3 seconds without having some sort of thought pop into our head. So mindfulness isn't asking us not to have thoughts. What it's asking us to do is not attach judgment to those thoughts, to simply notice that, I'm having the thought of, this is really hard. I'm having the thought of, I feel like a failure. And by doing that, it allows us to take a little bit of a step back from our thoughts. So we don't identify with our thought, we actually just see it as something that we're having. And then the last two, I think, kind of get put together. Mindfulness is a constant state, and that constant state is going to be bliss. So I think, mindfulness maybe at the beginning was sold as, practice mindfulness and you'll be happy all the time. And unfortunately, that's not quite how it works, because what mindfulness is helping us do is accept our emotions and our experiences rather than having to avoid them. Mindfulness teaches us that we can actually survive and get through those really hard and intense emotions. Okay, so some of the benefits of mindfulness. So I'm going to throw up 4 right there. Improves cognition, concentration, attention, memory, and reduces distractions. And so because mindfulness is about being able to stay connected and present, it does help increase our concentration and attention. And when we pay attention, that oftentimes helps improve our memory. Reduces anxiety and stress. And again, this is about helping us learn how to be able to manage and get through uncomfortable situations and emotions. And then finally, the last 2 here, helps to improve our mood and overall physical and mental wellness. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little about why these things are. So when we're doing mindfulness, because we are sitting with ourselves in a very non-judgmental way, and we're learning to become aware of the thoughts and feelings that we have, we become much better at being able to recognize those thoughts and feelings when they first start to show up. And the reason that that's so important is that allows us to be able to respond to them, to be able to kind of decide what we're going to do with them instead of reacting to them. Helps you see that thoughts are not facts. Sometimes depending on what I'm doing, I can have the thought of, you're the biggest, fattest failure that has ever walked the earth. You are so incompetent, you have no business doing this. And it's really hard when I talk to myself that way, not to take that personally and not to start to think, well, who knows me better than me? Maybe those are true. And so mindfulness will help teach us that, that's a thought I'm having. I'm having a thought that I'm a big fat failure. Does not mean that that thought is true or a fact. Increases self-compassion, because once we're kind of able to start looking at our thoughts as thoughts and not necessarily something that's true or accurate, I can have a little more compassion with myself and sit with that uncomfortable thought and those emotions that come up. And it can start to help kind of break some of those old unhealthy ways of thinking and acting. And because because mindfulness is helping us learn how to sit with intense emotions and the thoughts that come up, it helps keep us in that front part of our brain. So the brain that, the part of our brain that is, making decisions, thinking through things. If I've, been practicing mindfulness and I'm better able to endure my intense emotions, I'm better able to decide what I'm going to pay attention to and what I'm going to let go of, because it's allowing me to respond instead of react to my emotions. And I have a quick video here, and we're just going to watch about the first minute and a half, and that talks a little bit about, what makes mindfulness so wonderful.
Is it showing for you, Trisha?
It is. Is it showing for you guys?
No.
Oh, is it not showing?
No.
Okay. Oh. Let me see. let's try. Did the PowerPoint stay up the whole time? Is that what you saw?
Yep.
Okay, let me try. How about that? Do you guys see YouTube?
No.
No, okay. Okay. Well, I will not plan on using the videos. So basically where this video is going is that when something happens that upsets us or makes us angry, we tend to have an angry thought. And then what can happen is we notice that we feel angry. We're having angry thoughts and we react angrily. Which isn't often what we want to do. So I think the example I was using, someone cut the cartoon person off in traffic, and they reacted very angrily, got out of the car and started chasing this person down. Not how I think not what most of us want to do when someone cuts us off. So part of what mindfulness helps us learn is it doesn't want us to invalidate our emotions or pretend that we're not having emotions, because that's something we can't control. We have an emotion and it's there. What mindfulness is asking us to do is be able to stay with that emotion, and instead of judging it, maybe reframe and ask ourselves, well, how is my reaction? How justified is my reaction to that emotion? Okay. And then something also connected to mindfulness is the idea of the wise mind. So the wise mind is kind of this balance between the very rational and logical part of our brain and the emotional part of our brain. So when we talk about being in the rational or reasonable mind, this is often considered the very kind of cool part of our brain because it's very objective. Um, again, in this state, the front of our brain is activated. We're thinking rationally and logically. But oftentimes, what can happen in our rational mind is we discount our values and feelings as being unimportant. Then, on the flip side of that, if we find ourselves in our emotional mind, this is kind of considered the hot button area of our mind because it's usually very passionate, very intense, and extreme. And so when we're in the emotional part of our mind, it makes it very difficult to reason and think logically. Uh, and we might be aware of, the facts of the situation, but because our emotions are so strong and overruling everything, we tend to distort them. And so ideally, where we want to be is what's called the wise mind. And it's this balance between the reasonable or rational mind and the emotional mind. Because from this place, we can see that our emotions and our values are meaningful. Just as being able to react logically is also important. So we're able to kind of find that middle ground of respecting our emotions, acknowledging our emotions, realizing that they're important, but not letting them dictate how we're going to react to the situation. So before we kind of start to get into some mindfulness activities, what I'd like to spend a little bit of time is, identifying what those daily distractions are. What keeps you from being able to stay present with yourself, stay present with your daily activities, with your day. And the reason that this is important is that once we're able to identify some of these distractions, then we're able to decide and make a plan on how we're going to handle them. So I'm going to throw up a few as examples of media and overthinking. I don't know, for many of you, when I work, I keep my phone right next to me, and it becomes very tempting throughout the day to be like, oh, I'm going to take a 5-minute break and see what's going on Facebook. And then before I know it, I've spent an hour. And depending on what was on my Facebook, if it was a lot of, the news cycles with everything that's going on, that starts me overthinking. That overthinking about it can raise my anxiety. And before I know it, I've spent an hour on Facebook and then an hour, anxious about everything that I found out. And so, maybe I will, and I'll throw up a couple more: phone and texting. If I've got my phone here face up, if a text comes in, I can see it, and my attention is pulled from what I'm doing right to my phone. And I'd like to, if you want to take just a moment to kind of think about what are the things in your life that keep you from being able to, uh, stay present and stay focused. And if anyone feels comfortable sharing, I'd love, Bailey, is the chat room up and open?
It is, yes.
Yeah, if anybody feels like kind of sharing some of the things that distract them from being present with themselves or their day, I'd love to see some of those. Email, trying to do everything at one time. Yeah, can kind of feel like we're being pulled in every direction. Yeah, Megan, I think you were mentioning that kind of before we started tonight. And then I'll pop up a few of the others that tend to come up. And as you can see, there can be so many different things that end up distracting us and make it difficult for us to stay present with ourselves in our life. And so once we're able to start identifying some of these things, what we can do is kind of make some plans on how we're going to deal with them. Kids are on the list. Yeah, definitely. I think Bailey experienced that as well. And sometimes it's like the best laid plans, and having, so sometimes having a backup plan. So for me, one of the things that I have done is really limited the amount of time that I allow myself to spend on social media. One, just because I could find that, hours could go by and I'd just spent them scrolling through it. But then that starts to take over my anxiety level, what I'm thinking, which can start to derail the rest of my day. So I have a rule that I give myself 15 minutes in the evening during the week to get on social media. I have blocked certain sites, so I limit what's coming into my news feed. And then the next thing, that can be important to identify who are your internal hijackers. And when I talk about internal hijackers, I'm talking about our internal monologue. So if you take a moment and just kind of, ask yourself, how do you talk to yourself? If you make a mistake, what do you tend to say to yourself? And for some people, that internal monologue can sound a little bit like, nobody likes you. You're not good enough. You don't deserve to be happy. You know what? Don't apply for that job because you're not good enough. Everybody else that's applying for it is going to be more qualified than you. And even if you did get that job, you don't deserve it because you don't deserve to be happy. No one likes you. No one's going to care if you go to the party. You should just stay home. Why bother? Why bother to apply for that job? Because we all know, once again, you're not good enough. And even if you get that job, you'll mess it up just like you've messed everything else up. So we can find that, our internal hijackers, when they're negative, can really start to derail our day because we can get caught up in the cycle of those thoughts, or one thought leading to another. And the problem with our internal hijackers is really what they are they're bullies. And bullies tend to lie. They tend to use very extreme language and talk in all or nothing terms. So they say things like nobody, always, never, everyone, every time. And the more we try to argue with our internal bully, the louder it gets, the meaner it gets. And one of the videos I wanted to show tonight, you can find this on YouTube. It's called Struggling with Internal Hijackers. It's about a 5-7 minute cartoon that talks about what it's like when we're ruled by our internal hijackers, when they're dictating, what we're doing and where we're going. But at the end of the video, what it asks us to do is take a moment and identify who your kind and wise travelers are. So, what are the kind and supportive things that you tend to say for yourself? And sometimes this can be really hard to identify or even do if it's something that we haven't done or we're not used to. It can feel really awkward in the beginning and almost kind of disgenuine. So if you're someone that has a hard time, speaking to yourself in a very kind and supportive way, I might recommend that you think of a friend or maybe a past boss or professor, someone that was able to be very kind and supportive to you, and ask yourself in that situation, what is it that they would say to you? And for me, because really what it is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the internal monologue that comes from our internal bullies and just reframe it in a more positive and affirming and more positive and affirming self-talk. So I use the first and the last one a lot. I know this is hard, but I've done hard things before. Because I can oftentimes, before I started using this, I would just go to this, you're stupid, or this, you can't do this. You have, how many things have you tried in your past that you failed at? Don't even bother. And so when I would try to argue with that internal bully about, well, there are things in my life that I've done well or accomplished, it would just discount that and go to all the things that I've done wrong, big and small, and just start piling them on. So I don't even argue with it. I just try to go to one of my wise and kind travelers. I know this is hard, but I've done hard things before. People like me. I'm a likable person and I like myself. I'm moving towards my goals. I'm capable of handling this. Today, I will work through my fears. I'm proud of myself for trying. That took courage. Okay. So I'll take a moment and see if there are, before we get into some of the mindfulness activities, if there are any questions or comments. Okay. And if anything comes up, I'll get to it as we go through this or at the very end. So here are a few mindfulness activities, and on the handouts that Bailey is going to send to you, all of these are going to be listed, and under each one of them is going to have a description of what they are and how you practice them. And typically, I will almost always, any mindfulness activity that I do, I will start with just a quick breathing activity, just to help myself get kind of calm and centered. And I find that even a very quick breathing technique during the day when I'm feeling stressed or anxious might be just enough to just, calm me down just a little bit. And one of the things about practicing mindfulness activities, I think we can get a little intimidated by it because, we're thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to do this for 15, 20, 30, 60 minutes a day. And you really don't. What research has showed us is even spending 3 minutes a day, after about a month, you can start to see results. So, doing a mindfulness activity for 5 minutes a day is beneficial. But when we talk about the 4 square breathing, and if anybody wants to go through this, I will take us through this. This is a very quick, maybe takes about a minute or two to do. But basically what you will do is find a nice, comfortable seated position. And I usually suggest, if you're sitting upright, to put your feet on the floor so that you feel kind of that connection to the earth. Find a nice relaxing place to put your hands. And what we're going to do is, and I'll tell you real quickly, and then I'll walk us through it. We're going to do 4 slow inhales in through our nose. We're going to hold that breath for a count of 4. And then we're going to exhale that breath out through the mouth for a count of 4. And then we're going to do it 3 more times. So it's like an inhale for 4 counts in, you hold it for 4 counts, exhale it for 4 counts, and you do it 4 times. Okay. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, please feel free to do so. If not, you can just find a spot in front of you to focus on. Okay, so just take a moment to find a nice, comfortable seated position. And when you're ready, begin inhaling in through the nose. 2, 3, 4. And you're going to hold it at the top for 2, 3, 4. Exhaling it out through the mouth for 2, 3, 4. Inhale in through the nose. 2, 3, 4. Hold it up at the top for 2, 3, 4. Exhaling it out through the mouth for 2, 3, 4. And go ahead and do that 2 more times, just kind of at your own pace. And when you're done, just open your eyes and come back and join us. And I saw the yawn there, and it kind of does. It kind of, sometimes it's not unusual to find once you've done that you want to take a big yawn, and that's a good sign. It means that you're activating kind of that parasympathetic nervous system and starting to relax. And like I said, this is one I like to do if I'm going to do a mindfulness activity. It's just a nice way to kind of calm and center myself. It's something that I'll do if, maybe before going into a meeting that I'm anxious about, or before I have to pick up the phone and call someone that I'm like, oh, maybe this person isn't always the most pleasant to deal with, just so I feel a little more centered. The next one, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is known as a grounding technique. And this one is really good if you have found that your emotions have kind of started to get away from you. And you're like, you know what, I'm definitely past the 3. I'm not feeling calm and collected at all in my emotions. I'm more up towards 5, 6, and maybe even 7. And what it is meant to do is really start to bring you back into the space that you're in. And so I'll take us through it, and I'll give you a quick description of it. So what it's going to ask you to do is to look around the room and find 5 things that you can see and describe. And then it's going to ask you to to find 4 things that you can smell. Oh, I'm sorry, not smell. 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can touch, and 1 thing that you can taste. So if you take a moment and look around the room that you're in, try and find an object that makes you feel happy or has a pleasant memory attached to it. And and really start to describe that object to yourself. So I have a 2-foot yellow Buddha head that sits on my kitchen counter. The bottom half is very smooth. The top half is bumpy and ridged, and comes to a point. The Buddha head has ears that are about 8 inches long. It sits with a very serene and calm look on its face, eyes closed. The material is very shiny, so it reflects light. And so that's ideally what you'll do. And you'll do that for 5 objects. And what that is aimed to do, because it's forcing you to really be present in the space that you're in, if you're finding that you've maybe been triggered by something or your emotions have gotten really intense, it's forcing you to come back into the space that you're in. And then the next thing, 4 things that you can hear. And this one can get sometimes a little difficult depending on where you are. But what you'll want to do is just sit quietly and really try to notice maybe a ticking of the clock. Is someone mowing a yard outside? Do you have kids in the house? Can you hear any of that? And I'll be quiet here for just 10 or 15 seconds, and really try and take in what the sounds are around you. Okay. All right. And then the third one is for touch. And so you'll want to find 3 things that you can touch and really describe to yourself how they feel. So you can even start with, if you put your hands on your legs, what you're wearing. How does that feel? Do the pants or the skirt that you're wearing, is it smooth? Is it soft? Um, and then you'll want to do that with 3 things around you. So for me, if I'm sitting on a bench, if I put my hand on the bench, it feels velvety. It feels very soft, very smooth. It's cool to the touch. And if I run my hand across it, the fabric starts to wrinkle. And then when we get to number 2 things that you can smell. And again, kind of depending on where you are, this is a little difficult to do. But if you just take a moment and kind of inhale, what are the scents that you smell around you? And sometimes you can even take something like a book or a piece of paper and smell that and describe to yourself what that smells like, and really take that in. And then finally, one thing you can taste. And oftentimes I will, with clients that particularly have a hard time regulating emotions or staying connected to the present moment and their space that they're in, I'll suggest that they keep a piece of candy with them. So if they're needing to ground back into the present moment, you could just pop that candy into your mouth. And this kind of goes with the mindfulness eating. So what you can do is, just as you open up a mint or a piece of candy, really take a look at what it looks like, how it feels. You could take a moment to smell it, but as you put it in your mouth, what happens in your mouth? Do you notice that? Do your saliva glands start to activate? Do you feel kind of any tingling along the jaw because it's sweet or sour? As you start to chew on the mint, what's the texture like? Are you noticing that it's hard and crunchy? And do you hear that crunch and sound, in your ears? And then as you're chewing it, the texture usually starts to change. And then kind of noticing, what does it taste like as you're swallowing the mint? But like I said, that would really is a grounding technique. And the last one that I'm going to go over is called balloons. So this is one, actually, you know what? I think I'm going to go down to clouds in the sky, because this is one I really like to do this time of the year, because we're into spring, the weather's getting nice. So this is a nice one if you're sitting out on your patio, maybe laying out at a picnic or outside, and you just take a moment. And again, I would take a moment to just kind of do a little bit of breathing to calm myself, to center myself. And then, as we know, as we've talked about, thoughts are going to come, and it's okay. Um, what we want to do is just notice that we're having a thought. And then we're going to take that thought and place it on a cloud in the sky and just let it float by. And then we continue looking at the clouds in the sky. And as another thought comes in, we take that thought, put it on another cloud, and let it float by. Because again, the idea is we're sitting with ourselves and noticing what's going on within our body. And those thoughts are going to come. But instead of reacting to them or judging ourselves for those thoughts, we're simply going to notice that we're having a thought. And we're going to take that thought and place it on a cloud and let it float away. And being able to do this, once again, starts to teach us that we can have thoughts without reacting to them. We can have thoughts without judging ourselves for them. And we can have thoughts without having to guilt or shame ourselves. So we simply just start to notice the thought, put it on a cloud, and let it float away. Okay, are there any questions?
Trisha, I want to ask you about a buzzword that's currently going around,
Sure.
languishing. Are you familiar? Have you heard folks talk about languishing?
I haven't. Can you give me a little bit of a context for it?
And so what I've seen is languishing is what folks are feeling kind of towards the end of this pandemic, where you just kind of feel like this blah, like you're not flourishing, but at the same time, you're not like completely in a dismal space, right? You're just kind of in this blah thing.
Right.
So thinking about that with mindfulness, it's not so much a negativity feeling, right? As just like a maybe exhausted feeling. I'm not even sure
Yeah.
how to describe it, but
Yeah. And, I would probably kind of, put it in that I'm not really feeling happy. I'm not feeling sad, but I'm not content, or I'm just kind of, here, but not really in the best way.
and so part of mindfulness, I guess, is in what I'm learning today is not so much overcoming something, but just
Right.
feeling it, right? And going through it.
Exactly. And that's what it would be. It would be an acknowledgement of, noticing that with yourself, noticing that there's been a change, because I would say, probably before the pandemic, most of us were, feeling a little more perky and optimistic about things, able to get out, enjoy our friends and going out to dinner. And we're not doing that as much. So we might find ourselves just kind of feeling that. And I don't know that there's really, and maybe that word that you said is the best word, because I'm not sure, that there's really anything to describe it. I don't feel bad, but I don't feel like I'm enjoying myself the way that I used to. And so part of being able to be mindful is really being able to sit with that, because often, when we start to notice that it's like, oh, I'm not feeling as happy, or I'm not feeling as fulfilled, or I'm not feeling as good as I did before. We want to push that aside and kind of avoid it and not deal with it, because we don't want to feel bad. We don't want to feel like, we're not feeling as happy or as good as we used to. And part of what mindfulness will start to teach us is to really be able to sit with that feeling and those sensations that come up. One of the things that I suggest to clients while you're doing your meditation practice, you might start to notice where in your body you feel sensations, because that can be an indication of, if you're someone that, oh, if I feel a tightness in my chest, maybe that means that I'm missing family, or I'm feeling sad because I'm alone. But you really start to pay attention to where things are coming up for you in your body, and just learning that it's okay to feel like this. We don't automatically have to do anything to stop feeling like this. And then I would start to kind of look a little deeper, how things changed for me. Am I noticing that I'm that checklist that we went through, are any of those kind of popping for you? Are you having, any difficulties getting through the day? And then that would be, I think, when it would be an indication to start exploring it more.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Well, I'll take this moment just to say a quick, big thank you to Trisha. Again, it was a professor saying, let's recommend Trisha. I talked to Trisha and she said yes. So I'm so grateful to Trisha for doing this tonight. And she mentioned she put together a lot of handouts and the PowerPoint. And so I will be sending that out in an email so that you guys have access to all those tools that she shared with us tonight. So thank you so much for all of that work that you did for us, Trisha.
Thank you guys for joining. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. Have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.